Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special Halloween premiere of the Cabaret opera Cesare, Child of Night, based on the German film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, music by Jonathan Beard to a libretto by Michael Cramer. We're very, very excited to present this to you tonight. I really love this event and how Jonathan and his director and editor Stewart Schill have put it together. There's a long list of credits, but excuse me, I want you all to know that you'll be watching the editing work of Stewart Schill, the original artwork by Sophia Sadaf. Creative consultant on the project was Kai Hazelwood. And our vocal performers include Michael Dean in the role of Cesare, Joanna Lynn Jacobs as Jane, Thomas Zagan as Dr. Caligari, and Michael Cramer as the narrator, and Michael also wrote the quite stunning libretto. Our instrumentalists include wonderful faculty from UCLA, Movses Pogossian on the violin, Antonio Lysy on the cello, percussion soloist Mike Shapiro. We also have Aiko Richter on the violin, Morgan O'Shaughnessy on the viola, Sarah Andon on the flutes, Michael Lang on the piano, and Jonathan Beard himself on the keyboards, process cello, and electronics. The piece is not long. It takes about 35 minutes. So we're going to run it for you now. And it is followed by a panel discussion with Michael Dean, Sophia Sadaf, Jonathan Beard, Stewart Schill, and Joanna Lynn Jacobs about the process of creating this new artwork out of a fantastic movie that is, in fact, 100 years old. So I want to give a little bit of a warning. There are images here that are potentially disturbing, involving sexual violence. And so I feel it's important for those of you who want to know about those things to know in advance. Although I should also say there is nothing particularly explicit that goes on. So now that we've said that, I think we're ready to roll. And I will just say welcome to Cesare, Child of Night.
You, the listening audience, are about to hear a cabaret opera based on the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the famous horror story of the mesmerist and his murderous child of night, the somnambulist Cesare.
Ask me anything in my somnambulistic state. I shall reveal to you your fate. So ask me anything, but be careful what you ask. You may not wish to know the task fate has in store for you. But if you cannot stand not knowing where the winds of fate are blowing you, then go ahead and ask me anything. I've slept these 7 years gone by. 1 hour a day I wake so I can please my master's perfect eye, answering their questions, making small suggestions. I'll even tell you when you'll die. So go ahead, ask me anything.
It is the first day of Oktoberfest. The town square is bustling as the people gather for the fair and to say goodbye to summer.
Dance like there's no tomorrow, live like there's no one watching, sing like there's no tomorrow. Winter is coming, dance like there's no tomorrow, live like there's no one watching, sing like there's no tomorrow. Winter is coming, winter is coming.
of scary winter nights. But presently the evenings are still warm before we put our summer days to rest.
Dance like there's no tomorrow, live like there's no one watching, sing like there's no tomorrow. Winter is coming, dance like there's no tomorrow, live like there's no one watching, sing like there's no tomorrow. Winter is coming, winter is coming. Oktoberfest is how we say goodbye to joy and summertime and love. So live as though there are no consequences, at least until we come back to our senses. Dance like there's no tomorrow, live like there's no one watching, sing like there's no tomorrow. Winter is coming, winter is coming.
3 people enter the square on their way to the fair. 2 are beautiful young men, one blonde, tall and striking, the other dark, brooding, silent. Francis and Alan, the summer king and the winter lord. They do not sing, they speak in silence. With them is Jane, a beautiful young girl with whom both of them are in love. As each of them professes their love to her, she laughs, refusing the pedestal upon which they would place her.
You men are all the same. You think you want a saint, but you really want a whore. You two worship me like an angel on a Christmas tree. But if that is all I am, then 6 months from now, you'll be off at Yorgie's beer hall getting drunk. You'll end up in bed with one of those sacred cows he has serving his beer. And you will catch something that will make your manhood swell with pride, though not in the way you'd like. And you would do the same, only he would have the decency to feel guilty while you'd laugh it off as a springtime dance. Every husband is entitled to it may be the gloomy winter, but you are summertime itself, oh so beautiful, childish, self-centered. You would sleep with the entire world because you think the world is in love with you and not just me. Did it ever occur to either of you I might want to be touched? Perhaps I don't want to be a saint. Perhaps I want something more. Perhaps I want you to do for me what you do with one of those beer girls. Or maybe something dirtier than that. Perhaps I wish you live too.
A darkness descends upon the village, coming not from the lack of sun, but from the presence of evil. A small, rumpled man enters. He wears a frock coat and a battered top hat. His hair is wild and uncombed. His eyes and cheeks are dark and sunken. This is Dr. Caligari, the mesmerist. He pulls behind him a large cart, and upon the cart, a coffin. He stops and drops a little stage off the side of the cart. Finally, he puts out a sandwich board. It reads, "The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari."
Gather round, good men all. Gawk at a sight that you'll seldom see. Your fortunes he'll foretell, fates of men he reveals. Chart you forth, talented, the somnambulist Cesare can see everything. Magic shall be revealed. Silently sleeping, my slave prepares. Waking soon will he tell what the fates have in store for you. Ask him anything, all of time he will reveal. Cesare, child of night, I charge you now to wake. Cesare, child of night, check the stars, tell your tale. Let these locals know what luck has in store for them.
Jane has seen enough, but Alan has something he must know. He asks, "When will I die?"
Full sorry I am to give you this fright, but I fear that you will not live out the night.
Alan is frightened, but all the others believe it to be a trick, meant to separate pennies from fools. Francis has a plan to break the mood by asking Jane to marry him. Alan objects. To see Francis marry Jane would be a fate worse than death, or so he thinks. They both drop to their knees and beg for Jane's hand as Dr. Caligari watches.
of you, my winter king.
But Alan's happiness will be short-lived as he feels the icy hand of Cesare upon him. As the knife plunges into his breast, Alan finally understands.
Now you know that I was right. Now you know about your plight. You're a puppet on a string, dancing to the tune I sing. No thing you do I cannot see, no thing you fear I cannot be. Beg mercy with your final breath. I am your destiny and
Cesare's proclamation was not a prediction, but a promise. A promise made not by the somnambulist, but by his master.
Cesare, child of night, chill them we shall. We too shall take tenfold what they owe. The ravens are ravenous. Reward and feed our feathered friends in the sky. Oh God, how awful are these young lovers. I so despise their souls. Learn they a lesson in life's miseries. Broken and beaten they'll be when we're through. You've cut and you've killed him with ease. Cesare, child of night, chilled them you have. Now get you the girl and gouge out her mind. Kill her coldly with calmest of hands. Oh God, how awful are these young lovers. I so despise their souls. Learn they the lessons of life's miseries. Make these fools tremble from fiends in the dark. Caligari's cabinet, and of the killer within.
Cesare charges into the night, mad with bloodlust. To Jane's home he goes. He leaps through her window. He drags her from her bed and carries her away. But as he lifts the knife, he pauses, unable for once to kill.
Never have I seen such beauty. Never have I known desire. All my life I have been waiting to feel such a fire. It's driving me insane. To hell with Dr. Caligari. I love you, Jane. To hell with Dr. Caligari. I love you, Jane. Never have I seen such beauty. Never have I known desire. All my life I have been waiting to feel such a fire. How am I supposed to kill you? God, it's driving me insane. To hell with Dr. Caligari. I love you, Jane. To hell with Dr. Caligari. I love you, Jane. Now we two shall fly away, you belong to Cesare. Now we two shall fly away, you belong to me. Now we two shall fly away, you belong to Cesare. Now we two shall fly away, you belong to Cesare.
Jane screams, but Cesare smothers her scream with a kiss. Now, Francis is alone. He runs through the town, calling out her name, searching desperately, until he comes to an insane asylum at the edge of town. There he enters the gates and sees Dr. Caligari in a white lab coat, his hair combed, his eyes bright and friendly. An orderly in a white uniform asks him what he's staring at, and Francis whispers, "Can't you see? It's Dr. Caligari." "No," says the man at his side. "That is but the director of the asylum." It is then that Francis notices that all the townspeople are there, and Jane, aloof and distant, in a white gown, and Alan, who should be dead, he is the orderly in white. And finally, Cesare walks by, picking the petals off a flower and giggling like a child. And Francis cries out, "It's Cesare! It's Cesare, the murderer! Cesare, the child of night! Run! Run for your lives!" And he keeps screaming as they drag him away, completely unaware that he is insane.
Now we know. Now we know the source. Now we know. Now we know the source. He thinks that I am the mesmerist, Dr. Caligari, who's been dead these 400 years. Now we know Caligari, with his cabinet and murderous sleepwalker. With his cabinet and murderous sleepwalker. Now we With this knowledge we may cure him. With this knowledge we may cure him. What a joyous
They all leave. The director to his office, the patients to their beds, the orderlies to watch over them. Frances is confined to a rubber room, and Jane thinks she is a queen. Only Cesare remains, to contemplate what has happened, and to wonder, is he truly nothing more than Frances's delusion? Is he insane? Or is it we, fellow listeners, who are mad?
What's this? What's this? I'm just a figment of this fool's imagination, not but a twisted mind's fantastical creation. Oh, how banal is it all, just a thrall to his bizarre intoxication. And yet I could be all that he made of me, and yet I could be Cesare. Wouldn't it be grand to be Cesare? Wouldn't it be mad to be Cesare? Prince of the night, seducer of the night, I would be such a fright, I would be Cesare. All I'd need is a crowd of believers. It's oh such fun to deceive the deceivers. I'd feed their desires, add fuel to their fires, tell them what they long to hear. And then they'd hold me, they'd hold and worship me. and then they'd make me Cesare. Wouldn't it be mad to be Cesare? Until the end of days I'd be Cesare. Prince of the night, seducer of the night. I would be such a fright, I would be Cesare. And at night, when I've given them what they want, I will creep to their chambers and I'll haunt the dreams from which they'll never wake. That is the prize I will take. The people are sheep, and while they're asleep, the wolf will be the one they knew. I could be Cesare, I will be the wolf, it's true. And to be Cesare, all I need is you. And to be Cesare, all I need is you. So go ahead, ask me anything.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this fantastic internet premiere of Jonathan Beard's Cesare, Child of Night, a cabaret opera based on the film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. We're going to have a discussion now with some of the participants and creators for the film. We're lucky to have Jonathan here with us. Jonathan Beard is the composer, as well as director and co-producer Stewart Schill, who also was the editor for putting together how the film worked. We have our vocal performers, Michael Dean and Joanna Lynn Jacobs, who between them do the roles of Cesare and Jane. And we also have Sophia Sadaf, who is responsible for the original artwork that is used within the film. I should say that there were also involved in the production of the music, the violin and cello soloists, Movses Pogossian and Antonio Lysy, are both UCLA, Herb Alpert UCLA School of Music faculty members, as is Mike Shapiro, who was the percussion soloist. Morgan O'Shaughnessy was one of our students who now teaches with us. And Jonathan, were there any other of the UCLA folks involved in the orchestra?
I think you covered it. Second violin was also Aiko Richter, who's now
Richter, and we have
graduate
Sarah
student
Andon on flutes, Michael Lang on piano, and of course I want to. All of them are noted in the credits at the end of the film, so I wanted you all to be aware of that. And so Jonathan and Stewart, you have put in a ton of work on this, it's really, when Jonathan first came to me a while ago. Now, how long ago was it, Jonathan? maybe 2 years.
We had our first discussion, I think, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And at that point, we still weren't sure if we were looking at sort of live performance possibilities. And obviously, with the pandemic, it moved in this very different direction.
Right.
But yeah, so it's been a bit.
And I listened to what you had and looked at the score, and I said, please, let's just do this. And I think it's destined to have an internet life because it's so. I mean, I had not realized it would be as much fun as it is. And maybe, Stewart, I'm weird for thinking that. But I think the piece is actually, I think what you've done is absolutely charming in a non-sentimental, non-goopy way, but because it's so witty. And it's great from that point of view. So I want to just ask, not to put any of you on the spot, but had any of you actually seen the original silent film of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari before your involvement with this piece came about? So that's my first question. I'll go first and just say I had seen clips of it, but it so happens that one of the first things I did around last March was I turned up the old Criterion collection and I watched this and I thought, oh my goodness, what a world we have here. And I actually watched it several times. How about the rest of you?
Well, I certainly had seen it. I mean, I went to film school and, pretty well versed in film history. So I knew this film. I knew what a, monumental work it was, or a pivotal work. And I was very familiar with the imagery and kind of the story, but it was really interesting approaching it through this project. It felt like seeing it for the first time and having to kind of go under the hood of it and deconstruct it in a weird way.
Right.
And especially now where I'm at in my, life and career, looking back on it, as opposed to when I saw it in film school, just really respect the filmmaking, especially in the context. It's pretty incredibly sophisticated and ambitious, cinematically. So that was really a cool revelation for me.
Now, hold on. I have a point to follow through with that I'd like to when we're done with the initial round of answers. How about you, Jonathan?
So I'm actually in the same boat as you, primarily in that I had seen lots of clips from it, but this also gives us a chance to sing the praises of our librettist, Michael Cramer, who has taught this film numerous times. And he brought it to my attention when we were first talking about doing something together. And those first conversations, amazingly enough, happened now more than 8 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
And so I had, in the last 8 years, become extremely familiar with this film. But technically before that, I also had never seen it all the way through.
Right. Sophia, how about you?
I had not seen the movie and not even heard about it. It's only when Jonathan spoke to me and we had a great chat, and then he introduced that to me, and I went back and saw it, and it was marvelous.
Yes. What was your immediate reaction when you finished it?
When I finished the movie, so I'd seen silent movies before, and like Jonathan had already explained to me, this is the premise of the movie. But when I saw it, it also looked like a theatrics, like a theater performance. But
Yes.
then it had an underdriving theme throughout. So I was really anticipating the climax.
Right. Wonderful. The reveal.
Yes.
Michael, how about you?
I had heard about it a lot. Oddly, when I was working, I did a lot of the music of Kurt Weill, various pieces of his productions years ago, and more than one of the stage directors of those productions had talked about this film, just not directly related to Weill, but where artistically German art was at the time Kurt Weill was writing. It was a direct result of a lot of things that were starting right after the First World War. And this film just kept being mentioned again and again and again. So I didn't get it. This was not surprising, before the internet, so I wasn't able to just click on something and watch it. And so it wasn't until years later I was able to ever see any of it. And then, of course, when this project came up, I sat and watched the whole thing much more sort of intentionally, and saw things I hadn't seen the first time or didn't realize this is what they were talking about. I thought it was just some film that was very interesting and you should take a look at it. I didn't realize it was this very, very unique piece of art that had so much in it about post-war, the post-First World War mindset and reaction to that. And there was all these societal implications to it beyond just being a great story and a really compelling from just a horror movie standpoint. It also has all these other societal things in it that I didn't know about until I watched it again.
Were you happy to be able to play the horrifyingly handsome Cesare Conrad fight?
Yeah, and absolutely having him and the look of his face and his expressions in your mind when singing this stuff was hugely helpful to me to try to figure out the right colors to give to it. So his performance, yeah, absolutely is pivotal to what I was thinking about the role. Sure.
Joanna, how about you? What did you?
Yeah, I had not heard of it. Well, is that right? It did sound familiar to me, but it was vaguely familiar. I hadn't hardly heard of it, and I hadn't seen it. So it was gorgeous to be able to watch it, and I had also seen clips of other silent films, and so I had a sense of what that whole world was about, that vibe, but I hadn't actually watched a whole one all the way through. So it was a really cool experience and strange and mind-bending a little bit.
It certainly is.
Juxtaposed with this context as well.
Well, I mean, now that we've all seen it and we know the twist at the end, it well may be that the entire continent of Europe, as well as the rest of the world, was in an insane asylum during World War I and perhaps still remains there. And the people whom we are in love with, sit on a throne and believe they are queens. What can I say? Everything old is still with us. So for Jonathan, Stewart, and Sophia, I find the tone of this cabaret opera extremely interesting. To me, I'm assuming there must have been a conscious choice at some point to go in the direction of a heightened retro look at this expressionist classic, to not underplay it, but to really go with it. Everything including the negative, positive film effects and the time shifting that you used within it, Stewart. I find the opera as it's currently composed and edited to be fascinating precisely because of this clash of styles. There's this old-fashioned acting and photography. We call it old-fashioned, although of course it was completely radical for its time. And but it's playing out to a soundtrack that is modern, sometimes industrial, and certainly jazzy as well. So for me, the friction that elicits is delicious and even witty. Qualities that don't immediately spring to mind when you're discussing German expressionist film. Does any of you find the same friction in the piece? Am I totally off base with this? And please feel free to let me know. Or Jonathan, if you think, no, everything was meant to be completely serious here. And if not, did you do this on purpose, or how did this come about? Was it planned, or was it more of an organic result at the end of recording and searching for film excerpts to use?
I will say, if it was meant to be completely serious, then I kind of missed the mark. But I'll start a little bit with some of the musical background here, because I think it informs some of it. And Stewart's and Sophia's choices certainly were fascinating and wonderful, and I'll let them speak to that. But some of this gets its DNA from fairly early on in the creative musical process, and then some of it is due to necessity. So certainly when starting out, conceptually, I was trying to think about a sort of not exactly melding, but more mashing of styles and ways to kind of, there are little sort of homages to a number of different things that I really like that don't necessarily have that much to do with each other individually, but together speak to me a lot. And so the music of Cesare has elements of cabaret. It has elements of early 20th century European modernism. It's got contemporary sound design, as you pointed out. The first conceptual inklings of tying it directly back to its cinematic birthplace actually came from our creative consultant, Kai Hazelwood, in a series of discussions a few years back of saying that basically, what if this feels somehow cinematic even in its operatic presentation? Mm-hmm. And originally we hadn't planned to go there directly by making a film, but the pandemic sort of necessitated going in a new direction. And so that's where Stewart and his directorial chops and his editing chops came in, because we had all of this fantastic silent footage material that could now be repurposed for a plot that is, while technically basically sort of the same story, it's paced very, very differently, obviously, than the original film.
Right.
So
fascinating.
And it's in the public domain, which is important.
Say it again. I missed that. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, and the film is public domain, which was
that's right.
Important.
But actually, that's really interesting. I didn't know all the genesis of that you came back around to treating it as a film project, which it seems like such a natural fit for. And also, my relationship with Jonathan previously had been as a film composer, and so I really responded to the cinematic quality of the music, and I really. I like the term that you were using, Peter, about the friction. It was an interesting thing to take this piece of music and this film, and they are not only telling the same story, but Jonathan and Michael really took it a very different direction. So marrying the film to the opera really was like there was a friction there. There was an interesting challenge in how do you adapt this imagery to this story. And so it was also interesting too that you were commenting on the style of acting. I mean, film was such a new medium at the time, and film acting was such a new, that the acting is very theatrical and, to our modern eyes, very over the top. But the minute I started playing with the film and the music, it became immediately clear that that sort of, histrionic acting really matched the operatic tone. It was such a natural marriage. So that really informed the whole process. And then it was because I do work as an editor, and I know, one of the things I've really learned as an editor is that you can really make film do what you need it to do. So feeling free to take that film, which has such integrity, and in itself as a historical piece, but feeling free to manipulate it and to play with it and to slow it down and speed it up and blow it up and all the different things that we did to marry it to tell this story was there was some friction there, but it was a really cool, exciting process. And it was surprising to me how well, and actually even hearing Michael talk about how he studied Cesare's facial expressions to inform how he sung it makes so much sense to me, because seeing how the imagery just married so beautifully to the vocal performances was really fantastic.
In terms of what you both said, but specifically Michael, when you were talking about sort of the precursor to Brecht and the Weil tradition starting in the mid-20s in Berlin, there is something about the theatrical backdrop, it's the wrong word, but the theatrical drop nature of the set design for this, that it is all constructed. There is no attempt being made to think, and we're in a real room in a real house at this point. It is all an idea. And of course, by the time you get to the end, you understand one of the reasons why, but it's also a sort of, to me, it's a kind of, alienation effect warning. Do not take what you see as reality, which, if we'd only paid attention to that. And if we could only still pay attention to that. Stewart, can you talk to us a little bit more about your use of time shifting, if you know what I mean, in how you use the images from the film? That you sometimes Cesare will start a scene and then it'll skip to later in Cesare's journey, then it'll go back to the, or I also have to say that positive, negative imagery of him coming down the side walls when all of a sudden he was split and there were two of him in negative was just so fantastic. And he sort of creepingly minces down the wall to turn the corner. And one of the great, I don't know whether that or Nosferatu coming up the stairs is my favorite, but they're both right up there. Seeing two of them at once made it really peculiar. It was like the world's weirdest Busby Berkeley sequence. So
this film is I think Jonathan just told me this, but it's referred to as the very first horror film. This I think predates Nosferatu, right?
I think it does by a year or two.
Yes,
I mean, it's interesting to think about how shocking this film must have been in 1920. So, I mean, part of that, Peter, is, me having to be creative and visual, figure out ways to visually treat the stuff because out of necessity and because we had to, repeat imagery and stuff. But I think that point about, the expressionistic sets, which are the thing that most people remember about this film, which was so gorgeous and did set this very surreal world. That's such a principle that I think about always with filmmaking is, the audience will accept anything if you set the world and you set the tone right away. And when I was sitting with Jonathan and we were working on, this film, I would constantly say to him, well, what would we be seeing if this was on stage? I was thinking about this as a theatrical piece in a way, and I was wanting to treat it that way. And sometimes the way that we pull back from the images and stuff gives you that proscenium sense of distance. That we set the world. So I think even in this adaptation of it, we say very clearly early on, what you're seeing and what you're hearing is not always literally true. It's not linear. I took a very nonlinear, I gave myself the freedom to be very nonlinear with it.
Right.
But we wanted it to be emotionally true. And we wanted the images sometimes aren't literally telling the story that we're hearing, but they emotionally matched. And it was kind of gratifying how well that principle that was worked as a guiding principle. And sometimes imagery, image and sound there could be a real counterpoint there, but it still made some kind of emotional sense. And also, I'll just say one more thing, just to answer your question, which is, and actually Jonathan and I just had this discussion the other night about, Peter Jackson did this great movie about World War I, where he took old, documentary footage and slowed it down to real time and processed it and colorized it in a way that made it feel very naturalistic. And that seemed very unprecedented and made you look at that film very differently. It's the same with like classic old silent black and white films like this. We're used to them being sort of a little fast and jumpy and having this certain tone. So when I slow stuff down or I add some, digital movement to it, it adds a fluidity that allows us to approach it in a different way than we would just a silent movie. And I thought that was really beautiful.
That's very interesting. Also you managed to preserve one of my favorite moments, which is an iconic one, and you revisit it so that the moment of the abduction, you do have that great moment of Cesare hauling the body over the rooftops and then going up into the distance. And then we come back to it in negative a few moments later. And even though it's not in the quote unquote linear real time of the opera, I really thought that was brilliant because it was a way of sort of elongating the emotional effect of that really horrific scene. And it's
and also that was I really enjoyed that too. Using the negative imagery allows you to see the same scene completely differently. You see completely different things in it. It feels really different, and that's one of those instances where I feel like the opera veered from the movie a bit, the plot, in that, you know, we really go into, it's really Jane's story. And this love story with Cesare is not really so much in the movie. So that was a way for us to allow the audience to look at this scene again from Cesare's point of view. Anyway, Jonathan, you should speak to that, I think.
Well, I actually was going to also sing your praises and Sophia's praises on the incorporation then of the series of new paintings, which you fold in and also use cool cinematic effects on incorporating. We had this issue because it's, you know, has a somewhat different plot, that there were certainly places in our narrative that didn't have the clearest way forward using only the old footage. And it's in a number of those places that Sophia's paintings really help bridge the connection. So I appreciate Sophia's work on that, and then certainly Stewart's way of weaving it together.
My next question was for Sophia. Jonathan, are you done with what you wanted
Yes.
to say?
Oh, yes.
So Sophia, it seems to me that your artwork is, first of all, ingenious and stunning, and really sheds new light on this, I mean, what is frankly a pretty peculiar story. The hypersaturation of color and the gender bending renderings of the protagonists is really, it's novel. It's original, and it makes me and maybe others of us rethink our received knowledge about the story. Of course, to begin with, the whole notion of what's really going on with the two boys, but also, as Stewart just said, the notion of what's happening with Jane and Cesare. So my question first is, how did you arrive at the decision to design the story in this way? Or did it just happen organically in an artistic way?
Thank you, Peter. Yes, so the music that Jonathan has created and the narration that goes by and the libretto, the lyrics, everything played a lot of the role in me coming to the scenes in my head. So when the music, so what I did, I just put the earplugs on and then stayed in a particular scene for several times. So I played that part in loop and I let the visual imagery synthesize in my mind. For example, I was like sensing a lot of wind circulation when Cesare is coming by, and the music and the tonality in the music was like really letting me get to that scene. And when finally I had a synthesis in my head, I started with a rough sketch with pencil, and I just didn't want it to be a static image. So I let the music play as I was coloring and painting. So, and also my moods, how my moods were evoked when the music was playing, had a lot to do with the colors that I chose and the scenes and background.
Well, it's also was so fantastic because, you know, you think Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, black and white, maybe you think sepia, but I sure as heck didn't think brilliant jewel tones. And it's so wonderful because it's so, it makes it pop so fantastically. Yeah. I want to ask you something else. Was there a specific choice to go in and almost, to use a term that we use now more than perhaps they used in 1920, although we sure know it existed in 1920. Cesare comes across to me as a gender non-binary character in terms of how you have drawn them. Was this on purpose, or did this just sort of spring out?
So I didn't purposefully make him look non-gender descriptive, but when I was listening to the music and the lyrics itself, so I was more connected to the character, the personality of that character. So I did not perceive that character as a male, as a female. So the only emotional thing that came across to me was connecting to me. And I felt that his hair is moving across. So I just flipped the hair and tried to give emotion to it, and never thought of that character as a male.
Interesting. It's fascinating. You know, I also have to say, not to give anything away, but the first time just earlier this week, I had heard the score before, but when I was listening to it with the speakers cranked and the whole thing, I turned it on, and it was a little bit late at night. It wasn't, I was maybe 9:30, and I turned it on, and my dog freaked the heck out. He was like, I started it, and he was like, and he thought, he didn't know what was banging at the front door there. So we calmed him down. And
my work is complete.
Yes, my work is
some high-pitched sounds in there.
That's it. Well, I think it was the clanging that happens at the very beginning.
It's interesting. I just want to say, like what Sophia was just saying about Cesare being this kind of non-binary, sort of androgynous figure. Like, I kept being struck by, you could take that guy out of this movie and put him on the campus of UCLA, and he's a total contemporary hipster. I mean, he's,
absolutely, including the very, very, very tight pants jeans effect, which sort of end a little bit above the ankles. Yes, absolutely. Well, now we know how we're going to do our next operas. So Joanna, you have been patiently waiting, and of course, as I'm so happy and proud that you're working on this, because we worked together as professor and student once upon a time. And I have to say, I obviously been following you and know that you have been pursuing your dream in LA and elsewhere, especially with new music. So both you and Michael certainly have mastered the technique of creating characterization through the use of your voice. So what I want to ask you first, I want to ask you two things. One is, it seems to me that there is a tone, what Jonathan has described it as mashing. So I'm going to call it a tone mash in what we think of as Jane in the original movie and the words which she is given to say in her first song, right? So most, you men are all the same. You think you want a saint, but you really want a whore. I mean, this is not what we think of as, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Yeah. But so what was your reaction when you first saw the music and the text for Jane's aria or aria?
Yeah. It was so confusing, actually. After seeing the silent film and hearing this like different version that we're going to do, right? So the silent film is such a monochromatic, one-dimensional sticker of a character, this victim, and Jane in this version is it. Oh gosh, I love hate the character, to be honest.
Okay, why?
Because it feels like she is a walking contradiction. She wants to be more. She wants to be three-dimensional. She wants to be in color. She wants to have depth.
Fascinating.
But she can't. And I think that she's giving this dichotomy, like, you want a saint, or you think you want a saint, but you want a whore. There's so many more options than that, right?
Right.
This is what she comes up with. She's young and she's passionate and she's self-centered and brainwashed, as we are, by our surroundings. And I remember when I was first trying to wrap my head around this character, just getting literally so confused, because it's like, so she's saying these contradicting things, she's acting this certain way, and kind of capricious, kind of powerful, kind of spoiled, but you want to, and kind of pure, and at the same time, and then by the end of it, it turns out that her surroundings are actually the inside of this man's head.
Right. Yes.
Not to spoiler. I mean, it's not a spoiler alert because people have seen it, but yeah, it was just like, wow, she doesn't even belong to herself.
Right. So she's both victimized by men, in a sense. I mean, not to overstate what you're saying, but it seems that she kind of does define herself in terms of what the two boys say. Mm-hmm. But then at the very end, in a sort of meta way, she is actually created by because the actual Jane is somebody who's really gone.
Totally different. Yeah. Like the actual person is, I mean, all we hear about her is that she, you know, there she is, there Jane is aloof and distant. And turns out she's the queen.
Yeah, sitting on the throne. So let me ask you, so you had, you and Michael both had, Michael, were you in the trio, which is part of when our friend Thomas Zagan is doing the, now we know how to treat him, now we know how to treat him. You were also in that, right? So in a sense, that was a different role, right? Was it, did you think of it differently, or were you thinking as Cesare when you and Joanna were singing with Thomas in that moment?
Well, you know, the thing about Cesare is he doesn't really know who he is. And he's trying to figure out, because he doesn't know what his, even the ideas, and from the film too, is he's unaware of what his actual reality is and what Dr. Caligari is doing. And he has this otherworldly dimension as this kind of psychic seer. But then he has these real emotions and this real experience that's going on. So he's confused all the time. So it's funny to hear you say, Joanna, how confused it feels to sort of play a confused character. And that's really part of the joy of trying to get into it, is to say, I have to somehow be able to express, and in this case, just as you said, just with the voice, just with the way we use diction, just with the emphasis we choose to put on this or that, what color we choose to put in the sound, to create a person who's very sure of something in the moment, maybe, but then a moment later is confused about who they even are, and maybe I could be this, or I could be this, and then of course, as it ends up saying, I'm just a figment of someone's imagination. Now, none of it makes sense, but I could be this, and to hell with him, I love you, Jane. You know, there's a constant confusion. And that's what's really the artistic joy of trying to figure out how to do that, is who are you in any one moment in this piece? Who does your character even think they are in any one moment?
So, Joanna, did you derive inspiration from, obviously you did your recording before Sophia had done her artwork, but did you derive inspiration from the way the character of Jane looks at any time in the movie?
You know, not really.
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't think
I
you...
think that, well, I think that I mean, it was a while ago at this point, but I think that it may have influenced kind of at first how I was looking at her, but I was really taken with just where, you know, how she even just fit into this story.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well, it isn't easy, because there's sort of, I'm looking like a nice young lady, Jane. Then there's sort of quasi-somnambulist Jane, who kind of hides by corners. And then there's Jane with her little tiara on her head, completely sort of sitting on a throne, thinking she's a queen. So, delusional Jane.
Right.
It's complicated.
One of the things that I had to really embrace about this process, and Jonathan, I remember a conversation that we had way earlier in the process, and you said something like, yeah, she really lives in this kind of liminal space, or the quality of the voice and the diction, the characterization, even, it's like there's no firm footing, really. Like you were saying, Michael, it's a confused character, so it's not supposed to land. She never really does land, and
it's constantly on shifting sands.
Yeah, so I had to really embrace just my personality wants to like understand everything and like, right, make sure it's all like in place and makes sense. And I really had to just be like, okay, whatever is coming out, like it's gonna come out, and the cues from the score, the cues from the text are just going to inform what comes out, and the harmonies. And so I really just paid attention to those stepping stones and let go of the
yeah, that's right. Well, sometimes we want to go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna to add that something else that so that those shifting sands, they're reflected in the music as well. And in a certain way, Joanna had the hardest lift of the three singing characters because Jane's pieces, Jane's songs and the overall piece are the ones that are the most stylistically diverse. So Joanna essentially is singing, over really strange meters, over some of the more adventurous harmonic language of the piece, although all of them get some of that too. And then Joanna has to start with this, kind of playful, maybe least operatic of all of the arias in the whole work. So there's a broad sort of musical journey that Jane is on in the overall piece that is fairly unstable as well.
That's great. That's great. And isn't it wonderful that you can accept the fact, okay, so maybe I don't have an analytical grasp of it, but I can still come to an interpretive decision or interpretive choices without even necessarily being able to define them.
Mm-hmm.
Therein lies the art. So, Michael, I wish to talk about your relationship with Cesare and how looking at him, because I have to say it was fantastic, and also how, because it seems to me, I didn't look at the score again, but some of what you say at the end is stuff that you have said earlier, but the way you say it at the end is different, or at least it seems so to me.
Well, yeah, and part of that is, when it comes to vocal writing, and we're just so lucky to have been able to sing this stuff working with Jonathan and say, should I try it like this? Sure, give that a try. Well, I don't know if that's quite it. And we were able to experiment sort of in the moment as we worked on it to find things even in the moment that were unexpected. We were really, I was really playing with a lot of the sounds and the colors, because there's a lot of options with music like this. It doesn't put you in a particular box. It kind of opens up the possibilities. From the first moment you hear this music, it's not like what you're expecting at all. You're getting violins, but you're getting electronic sounds. You're getting sounds that you're just not expecting to hear. And what that does is sort of opens up all kinds of vocal possibilities. It means there are certain things you have to do. I mean, some of the vocal writing is demanding to the point where if you sort of don't stick to your really best technique, it's not going to sound beautiful. So you have to still make beautiful sounds, right? That's part of our art form, is being actors while still using vocal technique and making, just as any instrument tries to make a beautiful sound. But then you're also going to try to make unusual sounds in this piece, which you're not always free to do, which you're never free to do in other forms of opera. There's no experimenting with vocal color. You just, if you're singing a bel canto opera, you don't get to make weird sounds. You have to,
You're right.
And so it's really fun to try things. But what I liked about it vocally, I have to say, is that it wasn't an experience that I have had with other new compositions that will go unnamed that I've done. I've done a lot of them. And a lot of times it's sort of an anything goes attitude, just do whatever. And that was never Jonathan's idea, that it should just be whatever. It should be that we experiment with some things until we kind of start to open up what's working and what's really right. And I really appreciated that kind of play, that kind of trying different things, because a lot of composers of opera today don't have really clear ideas about what they want. And I'm not naming names, but I'm just saying that it's a very common thing to just sort of say, they're just going to sort of rely on the singers. Now, on the other side of the coin, you have people who are micromanagers and who you have to do it exactly their way. They're not open to any of what you bring to the table. That's also a really unpleasant experience. So my experience with this vocally was being able to actually work with the composer and try to find his ideas and see if we can make them come true. But he allows us to use our technique and our skills to find that. I hope I'm not being too vague about that, but anyway, it's a pleasure for me to play around, but it's not a pleasure for me to play around without having any clear idea of what I'm looking for.
Right.
You know, and so
you need to know where the sandbox is.
Right, and I had the whole time very clear ideas about what's happening here. You know, both based on having watched the film performances, but then also discussing with Jonathan how this is different from the film. This wasn't in the film, or this is sort of an original idea based on the film. At least they were all very clear ideas. That I really liked a lot. And then our job is to then take that and go, okay, I'm going to lend vocal technique to this too. I'm going to make sure that the sounds I'm making are going to fit in instrumentally with what the instruments are doing, those kinds of things. So it's very, very satisfying to work on, and having not done it on stage at all, and not having done the physical movement element of it, is a completely new experience for me. And to have to do that first, rather than have that be the result of weeks of work on the stage, and then your vocalism sort of finds itself on stage, was fascinating and really, really a great deal of fun. Really, really fun to work on. And the music also, I think, makes total sense. It just makes sense. Even the more kind of things that are purposefully confusing sounding and purposefully disjunct because they're not weird for the sake of being weird. They're weird because the situation is kind of weird, and we're trying to express that, right? The way film scores do, the way actors do in films. So when Conrad Veidt, for example, in the film, you know, really goes to extremes on that one, I'm always thinking of that one close-up where he opens his eyes. That's probably one of the most famous shots from the film, right? It just it just goes right through you like a cannon shot. It is absolutely mesmerizing, no pun intended, but he really is in a trance, but he's so intense. So trying to bring some of that intensity into the tone was a real fun part of it too.
So folks, you've heard it here. It can be fun to work in opera with living composers. It can also be extremely difficult. But I wanted, Michael, thank you. That was going to be my last question, in fact, for Sophia and for Joanne and Stewart. Stewart, obviously, you in film, you've done this before. And Joanne, I know that you spend a lot of your time working on new scores. But what was it like? This is where we can actually tell Jonathan how much we appreciate what he's done and how much we adore him. And you can save all the bad stuff for later. Because it's, you know, what has struck me from the very beginning was his extreme amount of organization. And it was clear to me that in his mind, maybe this is wrong, Jonathan, but you had an idea of what this was going to be from the beginning. Now, maybe by the time you spoke to me, you already had done a lot of work on it, which I think is the case. But by the time you and Michael had really gotten down to brass tacks, you kind of knew what was going to be happening. And that is not necessarily the way it always works. So, Stewart, what was it like for you having did you ever have to say, can you give me 5 more seconds here? Or did you just take it as it was?
Oh, no, I took it as it was, as a finished piece. But I'll just say for my part of it, I am not, just confession, I'm not an opera fan. I'm not well versed in opera. It's not a world that I'm familiar with at all. So when Jonathan approached me with this, that was what intrigued me. I mean, first of all, that I have such respect for Jonathan, and I really responded to this recording because it does feel like film soundtrack, you know, score to me in the range of it and the instrumentation of it and everything. And actually, even when I started working with it with the picture, the segments where there is no singing, just as score illustrating the movie is just phenomenal, you know, just brilliant score. So so it was a really cool, exciting opportunity for me to dip my toe into this world, and I had, you know, tremendous fun with it. And the more, as I said at the beginning of this, you know, the more I sort of got into the film and appreciated the film on its own merits, I also, you know, got so intimately familiar with the music and the recording and the singing and everything, and just have such tremendous respect for everyone that contributed to this, and the paintings that Sophia did, that at first I was like, how am I going to integrate this stuff? And then it just really, you know, it came together. This whole project had a beautiful kind of goulash of of influences that came together, and it's just really satisfying.
It's wonderful. Beautiful goulash.
Yep.
Story of it's my autobiography, I guess. Sophia, did you have any interaction with Jonathan, asking him about things in the score when you were doing your artwork for it? Or did you just take what was there and listen and listen and listen? Which is another kind of conversation, of course.
No, I think before the project started, Jonathan gave me a list of the script, libretto, and also a link to the movie. And then he said we also had a discussion how we can perceive it. So I had a lot of flexibility, but I also had a range.
Yes.
Within this range that you can, and the range was that it should overlap somehow with the theme, overall theme.
Right.
But then the number of art pieces and the scenes I depict was all very flexible.
Right. So Joanna, how about you working with a living composer?
It was great. It was great. And like, it's really one of the things that I really appreciate about your music and in this piece, Jonathan, is that just the setting. I mean, it's so the setting of the words. I mean, like I was saying, I was using the text and the music to inform my decisions and interpretation of how I was singing it, and I could do that because there was character in there. There was already you had the idea of what this was going to feel like, or I felt like I was following along with you, and it's hard to do. I'm realizing as you know, as I'm reading lots of new scores, it's a hard thing to do, to be able to imbue character in like in this marriage of music and text in a way that feels like an actual person rather than a different kind of thing. I mean, it can be so many things, and you made it a person. So yes, thank you. It was very fun.
I don't know how you
That means a lot.
It has an authenticity, I think, is one thing that you're saying. It is itself. It does not seem that you're playing at something else. You
and
have
I think
created something that has a life.
I think also the mashup of the genres really plays into that beautifully. The cabaret aspect of it is like, and with this sort of steampunk, like it really works. It works, and it works because you love this combination, as you were saying. So it's like, it's a pleasure. Yeah.
So Jonathan, I want to turn it over to you for closing remarks about the show, about what it's been like. How long has this been from inception to now?
Well, in terms of original early discussions, we're looking at 8 years. In terms of active work, this piece has been my friend that I've returned to over the last 5 years. I've been actively composing, but I basically returned to on the occasions that I've had time in my professional schedule. So it's something that's almost been an oasis to come back to when I've had time over those 5 years. And the sort of process, you know, it's not exactly like anything else I've written. It's definitely not like TV and film schedules, which are almost always, all about producing. It's lots of music, usually very quickly, get it done and move on. And at the same time, it even hasn't been exactly like other concert commissions or vocal or choral commissions or things of that sort, because we've had discussions for a few years about the possibility of doing something, but there hasn't been a hard deadline of when this had to get done. And frankly, it wouldn't have worked if there was a hard deadline of when it had to get done, because it had to fit in around other obligations that I had.
Well,
So
also in the past year, if we'd had a hard deadline, it would have been exploded past several times.
Exactly. And so that gave us time to pivot and take the sort of cinematic ideas even farther into this direction where we now are. And I think one of the real benefits to that schedule or non-schedule is that I have gotten to marinate on and live with this material for much longer than I normally would. And that's ended up coming back around and informing other decisions, even by the time, but by the time we were recording, I had already spent a lot of time with this music, and that probably contributes to the ability to, and sort of clarity of intention that Michael and Joanna were talking about. The other thing that just I love about this is coming back to this idea of loves that don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. But to me, everything in this is connected in some way, some elements of it more tenuous than others, but all of them in meaningful ways. And the biggest takeaway now that we have this finished piece out in the world, the biggest connection that I will take away from it is this community of incredibly talented creative people who have gone on this journey with me and with Michael for some or other or all part of it, depending. But so many wonderful, talented, creative minds and bodies and performers and artists and directors and editors. All of that has sort of come together into this community that's made this piece exist now in the world, and that part of it is probably the single thing I'm most grateful for of this whole journey.
Well, it's and listen, speaking on behalf of Opera UCLA, and in my small corner of the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, we are so glad to have had a part in helping make this possible for everyone on Halloween and later. And I want to thank all of you for participating in this conversation. Michael, Stewart, Joanna, Sophia, and Jonathan. I've actually learned a lot. So that's also a good thing. And I hope you've all enjoyed this. And I hope you'll be able to come back and take another look at Cesare, Child of Night. I want to add that coming up in the winter quarter, Opera UCLA will be performing a fully produced new production of Stravinsky's The Rake's Progress in Schoenberg Auditorium, with performances on February 11th, February 13th matinee, February 15th evening, and February 17th evening. So please do keep an eye out for information about that. It's going to be very interesting what we're going to do with it, and it's of course a terrific piece. And I can't wait to have you all come and join us and see what we do. Stewart, I give you my personal invitation. Please come.
Thank you.
Even though you're not an opera devotee.
Well, I am now.
Let me just say, there's a devil involved. So
okay.
What could be that?
I'm in. Will there be goulash?
Yeah, mixed goulash will be served at the intermission. Thanks to all of you, and thanks also to the staff who has helped us put this together. And I'll say that we are saying good night for now.